Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm absolutely delighted to have Sonam Wangchuk, an old friend, on this show, on this conversation. Sonam Wangchuk has had a very interesting life. For a long, long time, some would say for most of his life, Sonam Wangchuk was the private secretary of a legendary man. The Buddhist monk Kushok Bakula Rinpoche from Ladakh became a politician and then became one of the most renowned diplomats in India's history, spending 10 years. Remarkable. It really doesn't happen. Usually the stints are 2 to 3 years. 10 years, Kushok Bakula Rinpoche was the ambassador of India to Mongolia. He had a seminal role, this Buddhist monk, in a sense, bringing down communism in Mongolia and the revival of Buddhism, in being the first voice in protesting against Article 370 and demanding the Ladakh be integrated to India, and many, many more. To discuss all of this, I am delighted to have Sonam Wangchuk. Thank you, Sonamji, for joining with me.
A pleasure, my dear friend, and I'm grateful to you for having me here today. You have already worked on a very beautiful documentary, which is being appreciated all over. Thank you very much for that. So let's begin our conversation.
I want to begin on a topic that most people would be really interested in. People tend to think that the protest against Article 370, is something that is far more recent. Of course, we know from history that people like Shama Prasad Mukherjee and others protested against Article 370 right at the beginning. But one story that is really not known, from the very heart of Ladakh, a voice of protest rose which never wanted this kind of, loose union, should one say, and wanted an integration with Ladakh, with the rest of India, and had a nationalist ideology behind that thought. And that came from Kushok Bakula Rinpoche. Talk to us a little bit about who Kushok Bakula Rinpoche was and why he's such a nationalist figure. What did he think about Article 370?
Well, as you rightly said, not many people really know about the actual background scene that happened in those days, First of all, you have to understand the politics of Ladakh, the position of Ladakh at the time, because 1947, when India attained independence, Ladakh was still a small kingdom, although under the sovereignty of the Jammu and Kashmir king. But it had its own system in place, and because of the high Himalayan mountains, there was not much integration possible. So, although it remained as a part of the then kingdom of Kashmir, but for all practical purposes, it was a small kingdom, much closer to Tibet in geography, territory-wise. And 1940 was when Kushok Bakula Rinpoche returned to Ladakh after completing his studies in Tibet, where he studied for 14 long years and obtained the degree of Geshe Larampa, which is the highest in Buddhist philosophy. And his return to Ladakh was historical in many ways, because he was coming back with huge knowledge. He was such a erudite scholar, so well known, established himself in Tibet among thousands and thousands of monks. And then he was also, as we all know, he came from the royal family of Ladakh. So he was Galshras Bakula, which means Prince Bakula. So to have a prince giving teaching to the people, in those days, conditions were not as we have now, and it was a very desperate situation. People were extremely poor, backward, illiterate, almost 99%, other than scriptures and some Tibetan words, those who were able to do study. Most of the people otherwise were all very backward. So at that moment when he returned, his primary responsibility, he felt, was to teach people the Dhamma. So he would go all over Ladakh and teach people. Then came 47, and suddenly there was a turmoil, and as we know, the disputed status of Kashmir, both India and Pakistan claiming over the territory. And then suddenly to have the tribal, Pakistani tribals attacking, and many say that they were not actually tribals, that they were the Pakistani army in tribal garbs who attacked Kashmir, and then also came very, very close to Leh. So it was at that moment that Rinpoche suddenly sprung up in action and decided to defend India from these people. And he called upon the Ladakhi people to support the Indian army, who were in a very, very small number, because the accession of the state into India was still not done. So at that moment, he was trying to mobilize forces in Ladakh, and then he was able to reach to the Indian authorities in Delhi through messengers, and then, as we know, the military support came via air, because there was no route open at that time. So a military flight came, it was a very, very risky flight, because, you know, the flight charter route were not there. So it was Commodore Meher Singh who volunteered to bring this Dakota aircraft, and it landed here with arms, ammunition, and some soldiers. So that is how Ladakh was saved. And the role played by Bakula Rinpoche was very, very critical. Even with ammunition and without the public support, I don't think the army could have done much. So I can say that if had Bakula Rinpoche not been there, perhaps Ladakh would be a part of Pakistan now. So he has done so much for the country's territorial integrity, which we cannot measure in words. And for that, I think India should always remain grateful to him. So this was the beginning. And then when the accession came in, the Indian army came to control of Ladakh, and Ladakh being an erstwhile part of the erstwhile kingdom of Kashmir, became naturally a part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir, with Sheikh Abdullah as chief minister. No, he was then the prime minister. And we also know about the Kashmir having its own constitution. And incidentally, Rinpoche was also a member of the Constituent Assembly, and represented Ladakh in that forum, and fought with the Kashmiri leadership for its very legitimate rights. There are many such things I can mention, but
wanted to ask you,
go into those
one thing that we haven't gone into, Sonamji, is the ragtag bunch of young men that Bakula Rinpoche gathered together for the defense of Ladakh. They had a very different history after that, isn't it? Talk to us a little bit about that, a very exciting history. And some of those men went on to do great things for India. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, if you're talking about the Ladakh Scouts, then they are indeed the warriors, who saved, who defended our borders, not one occasion, on several occasions, because they are the local boys who know the terrain, who can survive in that high altitude terrain, unlike our soldiers from different parts of India. They find it difficult, acclimatizing themselves there and fighting on those high altitude mountains. We had, among them, so well known in the Indian military history is one Mr. Tsewang Rinchen, who went to become colonel in the Indian Army. You would judge by his valor by way of he is receiving 2 Mahavir Chakras, which is unparalleled in the Indian military history again. And he fought with the Chinese, he fought with the Pakistanis. And in fact, he is also responsible for bringing Turtuk area of Ladakh into India. That is as late as, 1970s, 80s. So tremendous valor shown by these people. Then we had other soldiers. One of them is my namesake, Sonam Wangchuk. He is a retired colonel again. And he was major when he fought the Kargil war and recaptured one of those very important strategically located mountain in Kargil area. We have, in fact, the whole, there are so many other highly decorated soldiers. I can't remember all the names here today. But together, Ladakh Scouts has made itself a name in the Indian Army, continues to doing so, and they are a pride of Ladakh and for the nation itself, I would say.
Just a little bit about Bakula Rinpoche's views on Article 370 and why he did not think it was a good idea.
Well, it all began in 1952. In fact, when he was still a member of the Constituent Assembly, and since there was no assembly at the time, the Constituent Assembly was a forum for people to discuss. And Prime Minister Sheikh Abdullah, presented the budget for the state. In one of the budget speech that was made by the Prime Minister Sheikh Abdullah, Rinpoche was literally stunned to find out that there was no mention of Ladakh in the whole budget. Now, Ladakh is almost two-thirds of the state's territory, but smaller in terms of population. But to find no mention of Ladakh was utterly, surprising, and nobody would believe that. But this showed the mindset of the Kashmiri leadership towards Ladakh, and how they took the people of Ladakh for granted. So Rinpoche made this very famous speech, after seeking permission from the speaker, when he told the speaker that he would make a presentation, a speech. He would like to speak on the budget, but in Ladakhi, because he did not know Urdu, Hindi, or English at that time. So the honorable speaker agreed to this suggestion, and he said that after I finish, my English translation should be read out, which was also agreed. And then that is when Sheikh Abdullah was furious, with what he heard being translated or being read out. So it is this point from where, they began the real, differences began between the two. Although Sheikh Abdullah in 1949 had visited Ladakh with Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and he promised him to support him in whatever way possible and needed, and made Kushok Bakula Rinpoche also the president of the Ladakh unit of National Conference. But in the assembly, even being a national conference candidate, representative or a member, he would fight tooth and nail with the Kashmiri regime for the discrimination they were showing towards Ladakh. And this became the main point, so to say, between them, and from which they never could recover. So, which means all their life they were against each other politically. So 370 was there, and it was provided in the Indian Constitution. So generally, everybody should accept it on its face value. But Rinpoche was not in agreement, and he began to oppose it from the very beginning. And he said that come what may be, come what may, we will not accept this kind of a status. And it was also in a way related with the plebiscite that was promised. And Rinpoche said that we don't care what, if or not, whether or not this plebiscite happens. But if ever it happens, and if ever the Kashmiris decided to go with Pakistan, we are not going to do it. We are determined to be part of India. There can be no question on that. And that is, we would prefer to be dead rather than going into Pakistan. That is what his thing. So from the very beginning, he was very vocal about it. After his election to the Lok Sabha, when he was member of parliament representing Ladakh for 2 terms, in parliament also, he always took this very, very strong position vis-a-vis 370. And there are speeches which he delivered in parliament, and those can be seen. And in fact, I remember one incident where the Kashmiri Congress, because by that time Rinpoche had become joined Congress, because Kashmir Congress was at that time not there, but in 60s Congress party was had its foothold there. So he was representing the Congress party, and in parliament he spoke against 370. Now Congress party, National Conference and Congress in Srinagar, in Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir, they had a different view on this. They were in a way in agreement with the 370 status for Kashmir. But Rinpoche was singularly he opposed it, and there was the complaint kind of against him with the then president of Indian National Congress. I think he was then Dr. Shankar Dayal Sharma ji. The complaint was made by the Kashmiri leadership, in which they said that the Congress MP from Ladakh is, drifting away from the party line, and he's saying this and that. Action should be taken against him. So, but as you know, Rinpoche was no ordinary politician, and he would consider and act on what the people's interests are there, nothing more, nothing less. So he told Dr. Shankar Dayal Sharma, said that do what you like to do. I have said what I said. I will not back down. I'm against it, and it should be so. And so finally, there was nothing they could do, and he would take stand against the party on such issues. He was against also all the corrupt practices that was happening those days. But for the sake of his people, he will always come forward and speak his mind.
Let's talk a little bit about Mongolia now, which is the other great adventure of Kushok Bakula Rinpoche. In a sense, Kushok Bakula Rinpoche, the moment he landed in Mongolia as the ambassador, India's ambassador to Mongolia, in a sense, it almost seemed like the demise of communism in that country began, isn't it? I mean, Mongolian revolutionaries would secretly come to Kushok Bakula Rinpoche to seek guidance, and even though he never offered any political guidance, but he was seen as a figure who would, in a sense, help, defeat communism in Mongolia long before, or several weeks or months before it actually started to collapse. And then after it collapsed, of course, he had played a pioneering role in bringing back Buddhism in Mongolia. Talk to us a little bit to begin with about the first part. It almost seemed prophetic that the moment he arrived, communism began to totter.
Rinpoche had a distinguished career. First of all, we have to acknowledge that he represented Ladakh in Kashmir for 14 long years as a minister. Then he was a member of Lok Sabha for 10 years. After that, he retired from active politics, but the then Prime Minister, Mr. Morarji Desai, who succeeded Mrs. Gandhi, who was the first non-Congress Prime Minister. He appointed him as member of the National Commission for Minorities. So he had a very, very distinguished career, and all his life, he stood by his ideology, his party, and keeping in mind the interest of the people above everything. And his very clear vision, he was indeed a visionary leader. And this aspect was recognized by a leadership of all political parties in India, be it Congress, be it Janata Party, or later time when BJP came. So with this very rich background in politics as well, besides social and spiritual life that he led, when he was asked to go to Mongolia as ambassador, of course, initially he was a little reluctant because he was not a diplomat as such, never had this kind of experience before, and he was hesitant. But then his friends and people in the government said, no, please go. You would be actually taking a free time. You can use it for your writings and this and that, because Mongolia being a communist country, there wouldn't be much work anyway. And then you have people working there, so they will take care of these things. So you just go. So he decided to go in the hope that he will find some time to read, because Mongolia has also many rich libraries, and he will also found time to do some personal studies and writings, which he never was able to do earlier. So, but so he reached Mongolia, which was a communist country. But soon after his arrival there, there was a simmering discontentment among the people, and there was protest against the communist regime, which was becoming stronger by the days. And in 3-4 months of his stay there, it was already very big problem. And suddenly, Rinpoche, who was looking forward to a very peaceful time, landed himself in that very difficult situation there that was happening in the country, with the people looking up to him for his guidance. And finding a peaceful solution to it. So that is what precisely Rinpoche did. And, there's also this prophecy supposed to be made in the early 19th century or late 18th century, which said that because Mongolia was historically a Buddhist nation, at that time it was in full bloom, and there was no threat or challenge to this. It was like in Tibet. And the prophecy said that in course of time, over the period of time, Buddhism will be annihilated and it will be destroyed by the red forces. And then Arahat Bakula will arrive to Mongolia, in Mongolia, and he will revive, restore Buddhism. So that was the prophecy. And there are so many signs to believe on that prophecy, because then they started making special thankas of Arahat Bakula, because 16 Arahat thankas are very common all over India, all over the Buddhist world, where the 16 disciples of Lord Buddha are depicted in different ways, surrounded by Buddha. But in that Mongolian thanka, the Arahat Bakula is projected in the middle prominently, and Buddha on top, and surrounded by others, Arahats. So, people already were talking about such a prophecy, that Arahat Bakula, and linking the two. And then in 3-4 months of his assuming the office of ambassador, as I said, things started pick up, and it was now at a kind of boiling point. Really didn't know which way the thing go. It was a very scary situation. It was just after a few months of Tiananmen Square and all those things happen in the Eastern Bloc. And so, fortunately, these people who were on hunger strike, as well as on those in the government, they would all listen to Rinpoche, his advice from time to time. He will be very frank with them on both sides in dealing with the situation. And he would tell the government leadership to not to use force, violence in any way. He would also similarly tell the agitating young people not to resort to violence and find a peaceful solution. That is the only way forward. That is the Buddhist way. And finally, I would say the climax was when those people in sitting on protest, they came to see him. I mean, it was not easy for a diplomat to see the young people on demonstration, against the government, sitting in protest and coming and seeing a foreign diplomat. But Rinpoche was kind of fearless. He said, okay, don't mind. If they want to see me, we'll see it. And then they saw, met, discussed. He gave them all the peaceful advices that he would always do. And that night, fortunately, there was a talk between the two sides, and they came to an agreement. They came to a solution by which the government would agree to go for free and fair election democratically, put in place a parliament, and the Politburo will be dissolved. So, it all ended so peacefully and so nicely. And in that whole process, Rinpoche had a very, I would say, important contribution behind the scene in bringing peaceful settlement of the situation. And for that, I think people remember him. And then, of course, he was there supposed to have stayed only for 2 years, which ended up in 10 years. So in those 10 years, he literally built the foundation for in the Mongolia relationship, and also in a very, very difficult situation, revived Buddhism in that country. Because the damage done to Buddhist culture in Mongolia was so severe that it would not have been possible to bring it back on track had Bakula Rinpoche not been there. So
Talk to us a little bit about his special role, since you're talking about the damage done to Mongolia and to Buddhism in Mongolia. One of the things he played a pioneering role was to be part of a sort of research that revealed the kind of atrocities that had happened on Buddhist monks in Mongolia. Mass graves were discovered. Monks who had been shot were later discovered. He played a pioneering role in the efforts to, research out and dig out the real hard facts of how communism attacked Buddhism in Mongolia. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, he was not personally involved into research and those kind of things, but he helped many of these people who were scholars and learned monks who were doing this, and cooperated with them and give them guidance. For example, there was he passed away recently, Lama Prabhupada, who is regarded as the most distinguished artist of Mongolia, modern time Mongolia, whom actually Rinpoche himself trained in India. He was trained in India, he returned, and then he set up a school, and then his whole work began. And today he's a household name in Mongolia. Everybody knows him for all the good work he has done. So he would undertake such research and has written books and compiled, took Rinpoche to those places where the buried bodies were found. He literally showed them with the dead, with the monks' body piling up with the in some with the rosaries, the mala in their body, and all in soaked in red, and all these places where atrocities took place were systematically dug out, and with the support of the government, which is now a democratic government in Mongolia, it is all kind of properly recorded who those people were, and I mean, how many people were found to be missing from whatever historical archives. I mean, tallying all the data, and so many such stories. And I remember many people coming to him to confess what they had done during communism, which they had to do because there were orders from the government. But they wanted to, open up and make themselves light by making these confessions before Rinpoche. So there were not one, two, there were so many people who would come to him and said, Rinpoche, I have done this, please forgive me and help me, and I want to express my remorse, forgiveness, seeking forgiveness. So, this, of course, was being done in his capacity, not as a diplomat, but as a Buddhist monk. He was the only high incarnated Lama that was there in Mongolia at that time. So he was kind of trying to, how do you say, people in difficult situation, imagine somebody who has done and he's now feeling so bad about what he had done, to come to Rinpoche and to express and open up gives him so much of relief. So in that way, he came out and helped so many people.
As we come to the end of this conversation,
Yeah.
Sonamji, I want to talk to you a little bit about the legacy Kushok Bakula Rinpoche left on Indian diplomacy and Indian, foreign service and foreign affairs. Um, he had a unique stint of 10 years. This is very, very rare. He engaged with a country which, the heart of Central Asia, where perhaps, India hadn't engaged in that manner before. He had a really out of the box influence in that country. Even when I was making my documentary film, which you so kindly helped me make, heads of states of Mongolia even today are willing to talk effusively about the contribution he made. Let's conclude this conversation by talking a little bit about his influence on Indian foreign policy. When I made the film, former foreign secretaries of India, wrote to me and called me and said, "This is amazing. I'm so glad you did it because." This was so necessary and his legacy should never be forgotten. So you saw his influence on foreign policy and as an ambassador so closely. Talk to us a little bit about the legacy he left there.
Well, first of all, Rinpoche would always say that I am not a diplomat. But the former, who was then foreign minister, Mr. Gombosuren of Mongolia, he very aptly said that Rinpoche would always say, I am not a diplomat, but his work spoke volumes of his experience and his vision and his diplomacy. So he was, in fact, the most successful, most capable diplomat one would ever come across. This is what he would say. And that is because his style of working as a diplomat come from his heart. He would go to the people, ordinary people, common people, spend time with them, get literally, mix up with them and share their joys and sorrows. That is very, very special about him. So when you are involved with the people directly, whether you are a leader, political leader, or a diplomat, it brings with that a lot of strength also in you. You can express it in so many ways because you know the people. So in Mongolia, he was like in Ladakh, he was so directly involved with the ordinary people that people call him Ilchin Baksh, which means the ambassador teacher. So he was literally their teacher, but at the same time ambassador. So in a way, he would work. He would always think of how we could help people. That was the purpose of his being there. And I think both Vajpayee ji, after he completed his tenure, 10 years in Mongolia, and he returned to Delhi and met him, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, he said that you have done some real exemplary work, and the foreign Indian diplomats posted in different countries must learn from your life, your way of working. So that was a big compliment. And so did Modi ji said when he was in Ladakh for his birth centenary celebration. And, I tell you one small anecdote. Rinpoche was accompanying the president of Mongolia when he was on a state visit to India, Mr. Ochirbat. I think it was in Rashtrapati Bhavan or somewhere. Mr. Dinesh Singh was the foreign minister, and there were a group of people, chatting, and it was an official reception. and Rinpoche was there talking to them. And Mr. Dinesh Singh, if I remember correctly, he said, jokingly, of course, sometimes I get confused whether he is our ambassador to Mongolia or the Mongolian ambassador to India. Because Rinpoche is talking so much and all the time about what we should do for Mongolia and, for those people in that country, because Mongolia was going through a very difficult time at that time, as you know. It was the transition period. So he would always seek help all way possible to help the Mongolian economy and social condition. So this was a joke, but so dedicated he was. And I think that generated a strong goodwill for India in Mongolia, which you can see even today if you go to Mongolia. And his popularity, how one become popular is because of his work, isn't that? Not for nothing. He was so popular in Mongolia that I remember one of my colleagues saying that the US ambassador to Mongolia, after he came to Mongolia and saw what he saw there, mentioned that the appointment of Kushok Bakula Rinpoche as ambassador of India to Mongolia was a diplomatic coup by India. So that was the influence he had in Mongolia.
No, a lot of people don't realize when they land in the Ladakh airport that they're landing in the KBR airport, the Kushok Bakula Rinpoche airport. What an incredible story. Sonamji, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for talking to us about the great influence Kushok Bakula Rinpoche had on Indian diplomacy, on Indian foreign affairs, indeed on India, and of course on Mongolia. Of course, Mongolia is a place where he built a beautiful monastery, a chapter of his own, old monastery in Ladakh, the Petub Monastery, recreated in a sense at the heart of Ulaanbaatar, that stands proudly and serves the people of Mongolia even today. Thank you, Sonamji, for telling us and sharing with us this incredible story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hindol. Thank you. Namaskar.